Welcome to Analysis. I'm John Rees. The Tory party have just concluded their first conference since their worst ever election defeat last July. The party is effectively leaderless. Former Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, nominally still leader, made a fleeting appearance and then sped away from the conference almost before it began. He left behind delegates almost entirely consumed with the conference-long hustings for the remaining four leadership rivals. I recorded this report on that contest earlier. James Cleverley, one of the four leading Tories left in the race to become the new leader, told the party conference that they had to become more normal. Whether that's an attainable goal under any of the new possible leaders is open to doubt. Cleverley's competitors, Tugendhat, Robert Jenrick and Kemi Badenoch, all addressed the party faithful at the first conference since they were humiliated at the general election by a Labour landslide victory. In just the 4 days of conference in Birmingham and in the full glare of the media, the contenders arguably did themselves more harm than good. Kemi Badenoch, the last Home Secretary, managed to embroil herself in a row about a proposal to abolish maternity pay, a policy she had to withdraw within 24 hours. But Badenoch also praised Israel's pager attack in Lebanon and implied that Muslim culture was a threat to British values. Robert Jenrick, probably the front-runner in the Tory leadership race, proposed that the Star of David should be displayed at all border entry points into the UK. He sported a Hamas are terrorists sweatshirt at conference and horrified even natural Tory supporters by claiming that British special forces are killing rather than capturing prisoners because of the European Court of Human Rights rules. He went on to defend classroom displays of cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad. Tom Tugendhat stressed his past in the military, talking up military leadership skills in Afghanistan and Iraq. The Tory party conference seems to have had little space for the one-nation conservatism that has been the dominant characteristic of the Tory party for much of its post-war history. Boris Johnson's Brexit coup in the Tory party, which sidelined more moderate Tories and delivered the party to its extreme right, seems to have fundamentally altered the direction of the party. This leaves the Tories ideologically closer to Nigel Farage than to the mainstream views of the British public. Indeed, some delegates had been to the Reform UK conference before they came to the Tory conference and found the Farage event more to their liking.
It's a little downbeat, I feel. I feel it's a series of apologies. It feels to me like a mass therapy session. It's a little bit like having counselling after you've made the most horrific mistakes. And we're all getting together and saying, mea culpa, we're terrible, terrible, terrible. It's not uplifting. I don't find it uplifting. Curiously enough, I hope I can say this, I went to the Reform conference last weekend out of curiosity, really. And the contrast in mood is substantial. The mood there was upbeat, confident, courageous. Here it feels, it lacks those particular qualities.
Conservative MPs will vote next week to determine the final two candidates. Party members will then select the winner in a ballot that closes at the end of October. So, can the Tories recover, or are they doomed to a generation in the political wilderness? Will Farage's Reform UK continue to split the Tory vote, or even replace the Tories? Or will Starmer's Labour government so disappoint voters that a Tory revival becomes possible? Well, joining me to discuss all this are two guests, both of whom have been at the Tory party conference this week. Andrew Murray is the former Chief of Staff of Unite the Union and a parliamentary correspondent for the Morning Star, and Dr. Haq Nawaz Mirza is a national executive member of the Conservative Muslim Forum. Welcome to the programme, both of you. Dr. Mirza, did you find the conference uplifting? Do you think that they can choose a new leader that will be able to get them out of the electoral abyss?
Yes, well, I've found it well organised and immensely pleasurable. It was absolutely uplifting. I do not agree at all with your earlier guest. I mean, we are a serious party with a serious programme and a responsible party, so we have to conduct our affairs accordingly. It would be irresponsible to make the sort of statements that the reform can get away with because they know they will never be in government.
Andrew, is one nation Toryism dead in the current Conservative Party?
Well, it's definitely on life support, at least. I mean, I think if one looks at it historically, one nation Toryism has been a bit beleaguered since the days of Margaret Thatcher. It made something of a comeback under David Cameron, at least rhetorically. But I would have seen almost no signs of it on display at the Tory party conference, where the candidates for the leadership seemed to be trying to outdo each other in being right-wing. Even those like Tom Tugendhat, who really probably in themselves aren't right-wing, maybe more One Nation, but have to pander to the small Tory membership that will make the eventual decision on who the next leader is. And that direction will definitely be away from any of the One Nation legacy that may remain in the Tory party, because they are obsessed with reform, even though at the general election reform took 5 seats from the Tories. The Labour Party took about 180 and the Liberal Democrats around 60. But it's on Reform UK that they are focused, and that will pull them to the right. And your report indicated some of the ways that's already been made clear, including in respect of Islamophobia.
Is Dr. Mirza, Baroness Saida Warsi resigned from the Tory party on precisely that issue. Do you have any sympathy with what she did?
Well, first of all, I don't recognise the party conference that Andrew Murray seems to be referring to. He probably attended a different Conservative Party conference. He probably is having deja vu about the Reform Party. We are a very distinct and very inclusive party. And if you'd heard, or if Andrew had heard, outstanding speeches by James Cleverley, by Tom Tugendhat, by Kemi Badenoch, and by Robert Jenrick, he wouldn't have said what he said. But then again, he's from a different polarity of the political spectrum.
But I asked you a question about Baroness Saida Warsi, who comes from precisely your background. So is she wrong?
Yes. I have a lot of respect for Baroness Warsi. She's done a lot of service to the Conservative Party. But as for her leaving the party, I do not agree with that. I think you can do a lot more good by staying within, working from within the system. I have had disagreements with the party in the past, but I have chosen to stay within the system and fight to win my corner, which I have done so successfully, and I'm quite happy, quite at ease with the Conservative Party of today. And I don't want to say be too personal to Andrew Murray, but I don't think he recognises the party of today. He's probably living sort of 20, 30 years in the past. Party today is very inclusive. You only have to listen to what Kemi Badenoch said, that in this day and age, in the Conservative Party, the colour of your skin is no different from colour of your hair or colour of your clothes. And that got the biggest applause of the entire conference.
Okay. Let me put those points to... You've made a number of points about Andrew Murray's stance on this. Let me give him the chance to answer. Andrew?
Well, I was indeed at the conference, and I heard all the speeches to which our colleague is referring. I also heard, I think it must have been the third speech I heard when I went into the conference hall, was somebody, a representative, demanding that the Conservative Party, as its first order of business, rehabilitate Enoch Powell and apologise to his ghost, presumably, for having criticised him over the Rivers of Blood speech in 1968. So while I cannot deny that Dr. Nawaz says that there is more diversity in the Conservative Party than there was 40 years ago, 50 years ago, that is certainly true. But if you look at how they are trying to pitch themselves and how they are trying to appeal the leadership candidates to the Tory membership, it is by stoking prejudice. I mean, just to take one example, I don't think that was mentioned in your opening report, is Kemi Badenoch says that too many migrants to Britain hate Israel. Now, this is blatantly an attack on Muslim migrants who have very strong feelings of support for the Palestinian people. And it's really dog whistling against Muslim people. And of course, it's also absurd, because if a test of British citizenship was to be supportive of Israel, this would be a very depopulated island tomorrow, because about 70% of the population, at least, do not approve of Israel's present conduct.
Dr. Mirza, some of the Tories, James Cleverley, was surely saying that the Tory party is out of step with normal people. That's what he said. It's got to be more like normal people. But if Robert Jenrick, who is the favourite to lead the Tory party, is anything to go by, surely asking that the Star of David be put up at every border entry to the UK, that must strike most people in this country as, well, absurd.
Well, that may be his personal opinion, but it is certainly not the Tory party policy. And as for stoking prejudice, I sat through all the major speeches, including the question and answer sessions. Nowhere did anyone try to stoke any of these prejudices. Everyone stressed on the party being inclusive and including all and freedom for all. Indeed, Robert Jenrick said that freedom of religion for all the religions is very important to him personally. So I can't relate to the remarks that have been attributed to him. And as for James Cleverley, well, look, let's not detract from him. The man made an absolutely fantastic speech. In fact, all the three speeches of his that I witnessed were outstanding speeches, and he was very clear that we need to be absolutely inclusive. And he did use the word normal, but in a different context. He said, we are and we should be and we will be a normal party. Nothing wrong with that, is there?
Well, it does lead one to the conclusion that it's not at the moment. That's the issue. What he's saying is we should be, but we aren't. And that's precisely what a vast majority of voters concluded at the last election.
Well, we're not normal in the sense that we're in opposition. We are not used to being in opposition, and that is not quite normal. We're by nature a governing party. We bring in good fiscal discipline, not like, we don't punish the vulnerable, for example, taking the winter fuel away from the old age pensioners who are least able to fight for themselves. And most of the candidates, I think, will be able to restore the winter fuel.
Andrew, let me put that point to you, because I was raising in the introduction whether or not the one thing that might save the Tory party is the disassociation of the Labour Party from its base. And the winter fuel question obviously has been an early indicator that might happen. What do you make of it?
Well, I certainly think one of the reasons that there was a bit of a spring in the step for the Tory party in Birmingham is the a complete hash that Keir Starmer has been making of government so far, both in relation to the winter fuel allowance, that gratuitous cut that's going to affect around 10 million pensioners this winter, as well as the taking of free suits, free tickets, and everything. So I think many Tories who were very downcast after July the 4th are now thinking, well, perhaps this will only be a one-term government, and that is entirely on Keir Starmer. And I've only mentioned a couple of the issues on which he has gone wrong. I would also concede that if the Tory party membership choose James Cleverley as their next leader, he would be it would say they are taking winning the next election seriously, because he does confront the Tory party with some of its own failings, and he hasn't perhaps gone as far as some of the other candidates. But I am amazed to hear our other guest praise Robert Jenrick, who proposes to criminalise saying Allahu Akbar in public under some circumstances. He's not proposing any such measures against people uttering comparable phrases of any other faith. So, yes, I mean, I'm afraid that Jenrick and Badenoch, at the very least, are running very prejudiced campaigns. And to be honest, all of the candidates are trying to outbid each other in how they're going to clamp down on migration. And as we saw in the far-right riots a couple of months ago, Muslims and migrants in general are the target of those riots. So I think all this rhetoric is deeply inflammatory.
Dr. Mirza, is James Cleverley the candidate that will be getting your vote? I mean, Andrew makes some valid points there, and you surely can't be happy with those statements coming from Robert Jenrick, or indeed his assertion that cartoons depicting the Prophet Muhammad should be in school classrooms.
I'll answer that. First, let me assure your guest that the Reform Party came second in 98 of the Labour held seats, not the Conservative held seats. As for the migration, look, I think migration is an issue which is not particular or typical to the Conservative voters. It is an issue throughout the political spectrum. And I think the concerns are legitimate and valid concerns that we ought to have some sort of entry criteria and have some sort of restrictions, that it's not a free-for-all. It cannot be free-for-all. Look at the pressure on our social services, on hospitals, on schools, on roads, on housing, and so on. The population has grown beyond 65 million now, I think, whereas the infrastructure has not had adequate time to catch up with the population growth. So that's a valid concern, I believe. And whoever you ask within the mainstream Labour or Conservative Party would acknowledge that. Now, on what was your other point?
I was asking you whether or not you support James Cleverley as perhaps the most one nation of the candidates, and whether or not you were happy with those remarks that Robert Jenrick made.
Well, I think all four candidates are outstanding candidates. I have been there. I have seen them in person. I've shaken hands. I've spoken to them, Robert Jenrick did contextualize his remark. He explained it, and he now fully understands what it means. But it's the circumstances, as he said, in which this is said. If it is said in an aggressive mode, as part of an attack on someone, physical attack, then of course it is wrong. But when it is said in the context of prayer or good blessings, then it's like, and he said it, that millions, billions of people say that every day, and he's got no problem with that. Now, who would I want to see? I think it is a little bit premature at this stage that the MPs would have to choose the final two candidates before they can be put to the vote. But let me assure you that James Cleverley made an outstanding speech, a brilliant speech. So did Robert, so did Kemi, and so did Tom. So we've got a difficult choice to choose one from four outstanding candidates, and I have no doubt the membership will choose the best one that is likely to emerge for the country as a whole.
Andrew, just let me ask you how you think the relationship with Reform is going to develop, and what difference you think it will make to their prospects if it's well, I think we can rule Kemi Badenoch out of it, but if it's Jenrick or, say, Cleverley, what difference will that make with the Tory party's relationship with Reform? Do you think that Reform are continuing the momentum that they built up in the election campaign?
Well, I think they are so far, but whether that will last for the full 5 years is another story altogether. We can remember how UKIP, which is more or less Reform UK's precursor but one, polled very strongly in 2015, and then that vote vanished by 2017. There's a lot of talk about how do we deal with Reform at the conference. I don't think either of or any of the leadership contenders are really looking to merge or even strike a deal with Reform, although Jacob Rees-Mogg did advocate that, but he's not an MP anymore and probably doesn't have the influence that he might have done. But I went to a fringe meeting which is all devoted to this subject, and they were saying, well, if 2/3 of Reform voters voted Tory, we would have won 100 more seats than we did on July the 4th. Now, even if that is true, that only gets the Tory party to 221 seats. It's way off a majority. And I think that by turning towards Reform, of course, there is a danger that for every Reform vote that they might win over, they will lose as many or more to the Liberal Democrats or to Labour. So I think the Tory party is in a bind. And the course they were outlining at Birmingham in the speeches of the candidates and the general tenor of the conference, I think is away from where most of the British people would see themselves. But the big unknown is how the Labour government will do, and if it carries on as it has at the moment, I think the Tories will keep a bit of a spring in their stride.
OK, well, my thanks to Andrew Murray and to Dr Mirza there for joining me on this discussion of the future of the Tory party. Of course, we will be closely watching developments in the Tory leadership election on Analysis, and we'll bring you all the news of those developments and, of course, of its relationship with Nigel Farage's Reform as we go forward. But for tonight, that's all for this edition of Analysis. Do have a good evening.